time limit 2 years for either one. As I was thinking, I don't know if you could probably do vice president after 1 year. I thought that was possible. I don't think that was the right choice then. Having now gone through this, I was in a much better position having been 2 years and then serving under you. But I think when you look at the limits, if you're saying 2 years to be vice president before being president, and we just put the restriction in the previous policy that says you can't come back and do it again twice, it doesn't take long to get in the box. And I think that was Chad's point on district-wide elections. It wouldn't take much to end up in a very tight box here where how do you choose a president and vice president given the restriction we put in the previous policy and a 2 year here plus the completion of training, you could be down to a very, very short list in a very quick minute. But I agree with you that the training is important. I did it twice. I agree with you serving vice president was helpful because working under you for a year made a huge difference. So I don't have a lot of disagreement. I just have concern about how you put those requirements together with what we just did a minute ago and not end up in a very, very tight corner, which doesn't take long to get to. It wouldn't, I mean, literally in the next election cycle, you could be there. Actually, it would be the next one after that because there's only three. It's the one where you switch out four. So I think that's the trip trigger is that year that whatever year you've got four trustees going instead of three. If you swap out and get four new ones, then you're very quickly in a box in a quick minute.
Thank you. I think in terms of approaching this, I think that we ought to look at like the first number one. This is underlined. Some of the notations on this made it. It's underlined because it's in our existing policy, but yet we need to think about it. Is that why it was underlined?
It was the merge, and I think that was for us to think about. So I would agree because I pointed out that
Okay.
this
So
was a mixed up policy because it had two and one.
okay. So number one, do we want it? We've already decided no on that.
So Amy,
No.
point out, it looks like we're starting with red. and
No.
starting with the new number one.
No, we need to go through these first because as we've just been talking, we have. That's why I was like, we have to go back to this because we're talking about tenure here. Like C talks about tenure. And then, so we need to outline the selection of president and we can delete one and then we can decide what we want.
Amy, to answer your question about the underline, bold black underline is MCS language.
Yeah.
Red is CSBA, and then the regular black is common language between the two.
Okay. So selection of board president. Do we want number
Okay.
one?
So there's no common language here in this policy. It's MCS special versus CSBA recommended. And so you're on page 1.
And I think we've already addressed A, so I think we could delete A. Because let's not have something that repeats it. Let's just have it referred to in the other one. And then B straps us to basically the situation we had where it's whoever's turn.
Yep.
So I think B needs to be deleted if that's what we wanted. Okay, this C needs to be deleted. But we talked about it is the intent of this provision of, I think we would write, it is the intent of the provision that the office of board president shall be selected by the board annually, period. Okay, and then, so that's number one. And then with the following considerations. And then we identify some things that are important to us, if that's like things like serving 2 years, going to the CSBA. What do you guys think?
Shall be selected by the board annually. I like the period because it keeps it short and it leaves options open.
And you could add that.
If we could just have that paragraph as one, the governing board shall select from its members, yeah,
So
That
select
could
the
be-
president and-
That can be that could be
Yes,
paragraph
that's the
one.
first one.
that could be paragraph one. Okay.
So all of this is deleted up to page 2, starting with the governing board shall.
Right, so we just scratch everything and start with the red.
Okay, but then we talked about some things we wanted, and so number 1, and then so we need to add at the end of number 1 there, that the following considerations shall determine the selection of the selection of president.
Shall be considered in selecting
Yeah,
the
yeah,
president.
considerations, yeah, the following shall be considered in the selection of president. Okay, and then,
And those are on page B, right? Sort of you're pulling from a page forward and then
so
pulling it
we're gonna
forward.
create an A there. So if that's a
For paragraph
1,
1.
if that's a 1, then we do an A. And then,
So do we need to say president and vice president from among its members?
I think we should set it out differently. I have kind of different ideas on that, but but maybe just, yeah, president and vice president. Let's see how it works. Okay, so what are the considerations? Okay, we wanted 2 years, we wanted tenure or not? 2 years. The board president shall have 2 years, shall have served
Vice president, right?
This is both. President shall have
2 years
As a board member.
as. Okay, so what about if somebody served years ago and then they get back elected again? So,
I would believe you count that because I think that covers Chad right now. Because when we got here, we had this discussion when I tried to modify this before, and it didn't cover your time, and that was a decade.
Wasn't in this, on this board either.
No, but I'm just saying I don't think it would matter which board. It would just happen to be you were in a feeder district. But I thought
that
that
would matter.
No,
That would matter.
I'm trying giving you special consideration, Chad.
Shall have served 2 years in the past such and such years, or 2 years period. Because we had one board member that served a number of years, then left the board, and then came back. And then when it was considered, it was a big issue when it was considered whether or not that board member was eligible to be president. It was determined that that time that he was president prior to the gap didn't count towards his, tally of how many times he'd served presidency. That's why, yes, gotta love this.
Amen.
So, so the board president shall have served 2 years. My preference would be
The 2 prior years.
shall have served the 2 prior years before.
So I have a
being-
question on that page 2B, 9121B. Just go to 9121B.
Page 3.
Yeah, well, it's B at the top. I guess it is 3. Okay, so go down past 9, and then it says the president shall, and then it talks about the 2 years tenure before serving as maybe vice president. The vice president
Correct.
shall serve. So I'm just looking at what you're saying and wondering if this is fitting with some of what you're saying. I'm just asking.
Is there some way to pull that up to where you're at and then remove it from where
Right.
it's at?
I think this is organized really strangely. So like
We can move that paragraph.
Right. No, like the first part of it is about the selection of the president and vice president.
Yes.
The next part is about what the heck does what board president and vice president do?
Right.
That's the problem with this having been blended into because it's 2 policies blended into one that we've now separated into 2.
So I think that that I saw that there, but whatever we decide on needs to come up with the selection because that's where it's relevant, not what the they
Right.
do.
I agree.
But so yeah, I think you're right. It's relevant.
So we could move that above right after that first paragraph of the governing board shall elect the president, and that read on page A.
Right, and then we have a sentence. It's we're
The
gonna continue,
following shall be considered in the selection of
Yes.
the board president, vice
and then
president.
we have an A.
Right, correct.
And
that's what
then
I'm
the
saying.
board president shall have served 2 prior years, based on what Chad was just saying. Board president,
Shall be,
okay, shall serve, that I have served, shall serve 2 prior years before serving as president.
okay. 2 prior years.
Okay.
Serving
Okay.
as.
All right. So, unless, and should we put it unless here? Should we, I mean, what if we don't have anybody that served 2 years? So then you don't have a board president.
Well, you could say,
Unless,
unless there's
Extenuating
circumstances like,
circumstances, meaning
Yeah.
they don't, it's not there.
I mean, with thinking with that, I mean, you also have to, we could get to the point where after the 3 years, like, or in a couple of years, I mean, worst case scenario, 4 of them leave and then there's 3 of us. None of us want to be president.
right, yeah,
And like,
That would be extenuating circumstances.
yes.
okay.
so there's that.
Yep. I don't, it doesn't, I don't think it affects us right now. I just think down the stream that somebody's going to end up in a box. So extenuating circumstances works. It's not rock solid. It's not a list. It's up to the decision of the board,
Yes,
which I like a lot better than a list.
yes.
Like the CSBA seems to cover a lot. I just wonder, it's confusing to me because we've added the black and the white, the black and the red, and would it be better just to kind of go through the CSBA recommendations and just tweak if it's something we don't like or we want to add?
They don't have anything on selection. So that's all our language. So that's why it's underlined. So if we want anything on what we want to do for selection of a board president, this is all about what a board president should do. And I think it's fine. I don't think I'd change anything about what a board president should do. But in terms of like the selection, they don't give us any guidance. Am I reading that right?
No, because it's in 9100, the one we just drove by. They're two separate policies. One's about the job, one's about selection. Organization selection, this defines the job. The reason you have all of our language in here is because it was combined into one policy years ago.
Well,
And so I think that's where the confusion comes in, is that we're trying to separate out into 2 policies, which was one policy because we had them commingled. And so you have our language in black, which commingled the job of president, vice president with the selection process. And now we have 2 board bylaws, one about organization and selection, the other that defines the role. And so, for lack of a better term, we're trying to uncommingle the 2.
So can we just focus on the red and then add the part that we need to add?
yeah, but you don't. I'm just kind of being nitpicky on organization, but you don't. You have to decide the selection first before you decide what they're going to do.
Correct, but that's 9100, not 9121.
No, that's the organizational meeting.
Correct,
and
that
that's
is the
set up.
selection. That is selection. That's the whole point of the organization, is to select.
Okay.
So,
No, because,
Doesn't give any criteria.
but if we're going to put criteria, that's where it would be, not necessarily in the president role, which was where I was concerned before. But again, it's separating out something that was commingled into 2 separate things.
I think that it should be where you're talking about their duties. You talk about how you select them. It just makes sense to me to put it all in one policy. But this is about an organizational meeting and what you need to do. Every year you have to do this because it's law.
Correct. And
This is not law. This isn't based on law. That's
but the organization meeting is selecting a president, a vice president, and then all the different roles we pick up, CFA, and the different boards.
That's required by law to do that, and I don't want to confuse what's required by law. We're required by law to have the organizational meeting. These are things we're talking about doing that aren't required by law. That's why I wanted it in a different policy. But
I think you can put the criteria in there, but outside of saying 2 years and
you
2
have to
years.
go back and do that one.
Was my concern when we went by that, because to me they're 2 separate animals. They're designed 2 different ways. It's why the CSBA language just defines the role. whereas in the other policy was about the selection. And it only defined the president and the vice president because every other board appointment is relative to the board or the community you're in, whether it be a CFA committee or the audit committee, blah, 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 blah. The problem is our old policy commingled both of those, and we're trying to keep some and get rid of.
So why don't we make a decision on, from the board members, where they would like the selection criteria to be? Let's figure out which policy that's in, and then figure out what the criteria is. So, for those that would like to see it in organization, or do folks want to see it in the president and vice president, 9121?
9121.
I think 9121 makes most sense.
There we go.
Okay.
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 So going back to,
I see it.
I don't anticipate changing anything on the red. I just like the way it's organized is the only thing, because we want a few criteria, and I think we should maybe, some of this language we had about rotating around is relevant, I think, for the VP. That should rotate around.
Take it into
And maybe everybody gets a turn at that. I thought it was a compromise position. This policy it was just before I got on the board, but it came about because, they had already had a limitation of you couldn't have somebody sit as president, because we had a history where there was people who sat as president for years.
Right, they did. And they wouldn't let someone else serve.
Right.
Yeah, so before I came on, this policy was put in place because there was a block that would vote against certain members and would not allow them to become president. So that's why this policy came about. So and that was before my time, but I heard about it just as I came on. So I think that's why there was a rotation. Although the rotation can create its own dynamics that are not always favorable for a board. But I think it's good to say equitable terms or allowing to serve equitably should be taken into consideration by the board so that everyone does have an opportunity. And granted, you may still have some board members that will have that opportunity that you won't. That'll be a rough year, but that's how it is. So we've all survived rough years, and I think that it seems fair to be able to do that. But I believe that it should not be done in a way that's prevents other board members, from serving again if they so choose, but they're not able to because the rotation says you can't serve. So it's a way where it says, like if Amy wanted to serve again in 2 years, in 5 years, and she's here, then how could she be able to serve if she's already served? But if new people keep coming on, then it would change that. So it's just making it so everybody has an opportunity that wants to, and I think that's a good thing. And that's what you want. You want to make it equitable for all the board members that are serving at the same time.
Right, and I believe that what we just did in the previous
I
one
thought so too.
gets us there because
So let's just can we just do the criteria for that selection process? So we already had, one of the things Amy brought up was, the sentence was, the following shall be considered in the selection of the board president, vice president. And that would be, you said the president shall serve 2 years prior to serving as president. Is that correct? So I'll serve as
Unless-
a board member?
Yeah, 2 years prior as a board member before serving as president, unless
Extenuating circumstances.
unless it's impossible.
Or barring
Yeah.
Unless
extenuating circumstances.
I just, extenuating circumstances work because you can define that when the time comes.
Yeah. That gives you an option in case you do, as Adolfo suggested, you only have 3 people to choose from and go, okay, yeah.
And we want to say it's recommended that the president serves as VP prior to serving as president.
And then the other requirement you had, Amy, was the training thing.
Does that mean that we then the election of a vice president becomes more important than the election of a president?
It had been in the past a big deal.
it had.
It should be.
Yeah,
I don't disagree. It was good
It
training.
should be.
really need it, yeah.
Because you're training that person to then lead in that role as a president, and there really is a lot of work that has to go into it. So rather than the vice president just being, just a vice president role, really is you're grooming them for the presidency in that role for that year. It's about education, formal, CSBA, and informal, setting the agendas, sitting on consult, those sorts of things.
And it creates a continuity from where the district has been and where it's going. So they've been in on some maybe longer discussions so that they're prepared for that position, and it just helps them in that. Because we did have, like Amy said, we had somebody who served as VP and then didn't serve as president, and we, that left that spot in a really difficult place because you don't have that knowledge that you had before you came into that position. But that person, it doesn't mean if you're VP that you have to serve, but you would usually have the intent to serve in that position.
But that was also based on the idea that it was predetermined what was going to happen every year no matter what. It wasn't necessarily a selection, it was whose turn it was. And it was both on the VP side, on the president side, and it put us in that box where you had a vice president that wasn't necessarily going to run for election, wasn't going to be around, and then it set up that cascading domino that got us into that box, which is why I get nervous about lists versus the ability to wiggle. I'd much rather have the ability to wiggle and lose a vote than not have the ability to wiggle, just from a decision point of view.
So, John, I want to throw out a scenario. I'm facing in my employment a couple of really crazy years because I'm approaching retirement and I need to select and train my replacement, and that's been defined as a 2-year period. I would probably choose to step out of the vice president and president role during that 2-year period of time. So I want to make sure that we're not setting any criteria that makes that a burden on anyone else.
I don't think so, because where we're composed now, we've got folks with experience. I think everybody cares. We all care about education. I don't worry about the 7 of us sitting here now, or the 6 minus 1. I don't worry about us 7. When I'm looking at this, I'm looking downstream. I think we're a fairly good group, and even if we do disagree, we agree to disagree, find a common middle ground, and keep chugging along. When I'm looking at this, I'm looking much farther downstream and looking back at what happened the first 2 years we were here, where things got squirrely very quickly. And there was nothing we could really do outside of throw somebody over to the other side, which there wasn't the ability to do because of the composition of the board at the time. And I think that's what Amy was alluding to earlier. That's what makes me worried and nervous, not that we couldn't find agreement between the 7 of us.
But
And-
Chad, that doesn't preclude you from serving in the future when you do have an
No,
opportunity.
absolutely
It
not.
doesn't mean because, let's just say it was in a rotation and, you're not going to do it that time. And so now you're out of rotation and you can't serve.
Yeah, exactly.
Never
That's
means
what
that.
I
It
don't
just
want to
means
see
that
happen.
You have an opportunity to serve when you want to and when you have time to and when you have the capacity to, because you don't want to feel locked into that and then, oh man, I missed my opportunity. I don't think we want any board member, but when the board member's ready, then say, okay, now it's, Chad would like to serve, and we know that because he's shared it with us already, and we know where it's going. So I think that's right, but I'd like to see us move on because I know we have a lot to do tonight. So
Yep.
I drafted up a couple. I drafted up a couple things we could do. So it just the things we've just been talking about. So what I would do is add a number 1 to the beginning red line on page 2. Everything on page 1 is just kind of gone. So page 2, and I'd put a number 1 there just so that we could have an A. And then we'll maybe need to renumber things, which I guess is kind of a problem. I don't know. Shoot, because then it makes it hard when Gamut comes back in. But
It's fine. We can review the numbers.
But this is a board bylaw, which gives us a lot more flexibility, other than, like you said, the legal version, which is the other policy. This isn't necessarily legal. This is up to us.
okay, and so I do a number 1 there. The board, I do a number 1, and it would say selection of president, vice president. Okay, and then Okay, so then that would be here, and then that paragraph, the governing board shall select, and then this sentence follows at the period after serves. Then it should say the following shall be considered in the selection of president, colon, and then little a. The board president shall serve 2 prior years as a board member before serving as president, unless there are extenuating circumstances. I'm not sure if I like that wording, or unless there's some sort of impossibility or something like that.
Unless it's impossible. So what you're talking about is that
Says-
you haven't been there for
Right.
2 years,
Barring
so unless it's impossible.
Well, and so for the next line, I said, unless it is not, and so the letter B was, unless it is not possible, a nominee for board president shall serve the prior year as vice president. Because, maybe your vice president resigned,
Yep.
Yeah, right.
you
That's
know?
true. That's happened.
Yep. Doesn't want to do it.
A board member may decide not to accept the nomination of president.
Yep.
Yes.
Fair.
So those are A, B, and C. Or do we want anything else for the selection of president? Do we
So,
want to
sir-
put in there that they need to go to the training?
I would put it as a recommendation. I wouldn't make it a requirement because I think it's very difficult to say, how do you know that you've got the time to do what I sort of did when I took the training? I took a vacation day and went down early because it means A, you take a time off and you go up to Sacramento and do the training during the year, similar to MIG, or you show up to the AEC conference a day early, which is when they offer it like the first time. You don't necessarily know what the job requirements are because we got day jobs or families for that matter.
Do we want to say strongly recommends or recommends?
I just recommends. I think if we put it in there, we're strongly recommending it.
Okay, so I have A, B, C, and D. D being the board recommends that the board president attend the CSB training for board presidents. Okay?
I'm gonna add one thing.
Yeah.
So, board member can turn down a nomination for either vice president or president.
Yeah, we'll put that down below on the vote. So I separated out
Okay,
president,
got it.
and then now we're gonna do vice president. So then I'm not sure how the numbering is gonna look. It's hard to.
But we can approve this based on the fact that we trust each other, and you're going to get to know, and we'll look at it, and we'll come back and get the second read
We'll
on
just
pass.
put in logical numbers.
Yes,
Yeah.
that
Um,
shouldn't be difficult. That's
Okay.
the lowest fruit on the tree.
And so, okay, so the following shall be considered in the selection of vice president. The board vice president shall serve 1 prior year as a board member unless there are extenuating circumstances. Do you want to say unless it's impossible or unless there are extenuating circumstances?
I would say keep the language the same. That way it's not different. It's consistent. I think
Okay.
consistency of language matters.
And then it is the intent of the board that the office of vice president, this is my idea, shall be rotated equitably among the Board of Education members on an annual basis.
Agreed.
And that way, there's this idea that we cycle people through VP, and
Right.
maybe they'll become president.
And even if they don't, they had the training at that one point in time, and they could pick it back up when it's convenient or whatever works out for them within their life processes.
So, would there be something that we need to put in place? Because, like, for example, Cindy, you're VP, right? But right now, but you've been president in the past, right? So if we are considering the VP role as a grooming stage or a training stage, would we want to reserve, since we're kind of like we're allowing that space for we're allowing that space for anyone to be president at any given point. Do we want to put any stipulations on who will be a vice president, like someone that hasn't been a president in the past, or a VP? Or is that too much?
I think it's too much
Yeah.
because we don't know what the elections are going to bring, and I think that's limiting us if we do that.
I think the other thing that happened there was if you look at where the composition was, I think we're exactly with what we were just talking about. Chad wasn't interested. Amy had just stepped out. You guys were new. Irvin hadn't been appointed yet. And Cindy was sort of in the hopper. And it was just a limitation of what was in front of us. Now we're not in that position anymore because you all have been here for 2 years. Irvin's been on the board now for a while. But I think it's just how the cards fell. But I think if we move forward, once we get past this year, and folks are rotating in and out, it works itself out over time, I think. Or at least I'm hopeful. Trying to be positive.
Sounds good.
I mean, because it's just how it fell, which was my nervousness when we come back around. I think it's not until you guys go again. I think the next election is only 3 of us. It's when 4 come and go that the rules are going to get. If you have 4 clear in one big swoop and have 4 new people come in, and you had 3 new people come in right before that, and there's a whole board flip, that's when this gets tricky. But if that happens, then none of us are here, and we hope we did the right thing tonight.
Okay, so the following shall be considered in the selection of vice president. I'm worried about a verb here. Let's see. It is the intent of the board that the office of vice president shall be rotated equitably or may. What would we want there?
Shall. Shall's more locked in. As much as I like the
The
ability.
difference between may and shall. Must is different than may and shall. So, I mean,
Yeah.
may and shall is still, either
It could
one.
be. Yeah.
One.
Shall is a little stronger
Must
than
is
may.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
You should.
But you have the option to turn it down, so that option's there as well, so you're still covered. Because if you opt to say no, then you've said I shall not.
So I have a question. If you do that, if you just put that it's equitable, does it mean that someone who's served, and as long as new people come in, they could never serve again?
It could, yeah. That's why I'm asking.
So that should be, so could there be a phrase in there that allows for that, even though, so it's equitable between the board members that are there, but it shouldn't say because you've done this, you can't ever do it again, because it does happen. I mean, it took,
Yep.
I mean,
How
if
many
you,
years did it take?
it took 15 years before I could serve president again. So because I had served in 2001, so then I couldn't
Yep.
serve again because there was a new board member almost every single year. So we had board members resign, we had board
Yep.
members get elected. So each time we had that. So I wouldn't want, because I'm not staying another 20 years. But one of you, if you choose to stay longer, you could, then how would you be allowed to serve again and rotate in again? You couldn't. If there was always an election and someone else was elected, you could never serve again. If you said, because that's how this
Yeah, that's how we got in this box.
was written. So if there's a way to say that it would allow for other members to serve,
Well, what the old policy did, I hear your point. What the old policy did was further expand upon rotated equitably. We're leaving the door open on rotated equitably, and we're taking out all this stuff on that, no board member shall serve if they've already served, and all of that. All that's gone. So rotated equitably means what the board decides it means.
There you go.
So
Want flexibility.
I think it gives more flexibility, but it could be what we're doing is we're opening it up for a lot of interpretation.
But I think that's okay if
Taking out this policy was very certain. This was who was going to be president. This was what was going to happen, and what we realized was
That
in
wasn't
that
a good thing.
no. It was an overreaction to a previous bad decision that let somebody sit there for 20 years or whatever Cindy was talking about in the past. They're upset because they couldn't get the president gavel into somebody else's hand. The overreaction was it actually had the same effect a different way. By forcing it to rotate and making it somebody's turn, you essentially said, okay, once you've been there, you may never get back again.
but that still might happen.
I agree. Which is why I like the ability to have flexible. I'd rather argue between board members than be mad that some other board passed something that doesn't even let us argue about it. I'd rather trust the people sitting on my right and left to make a good decision on a given day.
Okay. So then what we would do is so if we scroll down the list of the red here, I would say that we had on number 1, like selection of vice president and president, we'd have number 2, the duties of the president. And then so delete all this, the black underline. So number 2 here, consult with, we don't need that. because we don't consult with the majority of this, we consult with the superintendent.
Right, just take
So
out
that needs to
and-
be deleted. This word education down here that's flying, that's floating around for some
Basically,
reason,
we're doing
that needs to be
CSBA
deleted.
Yeah, that's pretty, that's.
Okay.
Yeah. That's fine, keep it. Seven is fine. Yeah, 8 is fine.
And then this
Yeah.
moves.
And I'd keep 7 the way it is, even though
Yes, I
black
agree.
is in there. And then I would delete the after meeting conduct.
Yeah, you already,
That
that
paragraph is
somewhere,
in
yeah.
page.
Right.
yeah.
The president shall perform other duties in accordance with law, but not limited to. Okay. We don't say what the board vice president needs to do. So do we want a sentence on that?
Well, it does say that on option 2 at the last page, it says when the president resigns or is absent, the vice president shall perform the president's duties. And that could be,
That works.
and
And then we delete the last sentence of option 2.
yes, delete the last sentence of option
Okay.
2. And take out 1 because that's the clerk, and that's for boards that usually only have three members or
5
5
members.
members, yeah.
We don't need to have what's underneath 5. The president shall participate. We already say that. We say that in selection. So if you're gonna do it, you gotta know you got this what you're gonna do.
Yeah.
And then option 2. All right, I think we've got that.
Are we good here?
You wanna review what you have?
Yeah. So okay, page 1, we have nothing. Okay.
Right.
So we have number 1.
Selection of board president.
Everything's deleted. So number 1 is we are and so that E there is deleted. Okay. So and then at the top, whatever that's deleted to, the president, vice president. Let's just get rid of that. Okay. So number 1 is selection of president and vice president, and then the sentence that is in the red, and then with the additional language, the following shall be considered in the selection of president. A. The board president shall serve 2 years prior as a board member before serving as president unless there are extenuating circumstances. B. Unless it is not possible, a nominee for board president shall serve the prior year as vice president. C. A board member may decide not to accept the nomination of president. So conceivably what we could have is somebody that served as VP and doesn't want to be president. So then that goes to B, it's not possible for the president to be somebody who served as vice president.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've got that scenario covered. Are we all good on that? Okay. Okay, and then D, the board recommends that the board president attend the CSB training for board presidents. And we need to, I kind of abbreviated
That's
the
fine.
language.
I got it.
We should maybe make it look like it did at the end of the policy. Okay. Then the following shall be considered in the selection of vice president, A, little a. The board vice president shall serve 1 prior year as a board member unless there are extenuating circumstances. Like there's nobody else, there's not another member who's served 1 year. It is the intent of the board that the office of vice president shall be rotated equitably among the Board of Education members on an annual basis. And we don't define that anymore, what equitably means. It's up to the board to decide what that means. And it's the intent of the board.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like the board must.
Roger. Left up for interpretation.
And then C, a board member may decide not to accept the nomination of vice president. So that language appears under both. Okay, and then you go down to ensure. Okay, then I would put a 2 before the word to ensure.
Yep.
And then I put duties of the president, and because that's what we're talking about.
Can you speak into the mic also, Amy?
Oh.
So it gets on the stream.
Oh, sorry. Duties of the president would be 2.
Colon.
Yeah. And then all these numbers, which probably need to be letters then.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we deleted the underline A and B section. deleted the majority vote in number 2 and deleted education underlined down there because it's just floating around doing nothing. And then there's that paragraph after CF 9323, delete. And then the president shall perform other duties. Those are all fine. Yep. Because sometimes you have to sign stuff. And then option 2. When the president resigns or is absent, the vice president shall perform the president's duties. I think we're good.
All right.
Okay. Correct. Once we see it, we can look at it better. But we can visualize what we're looking at.
Okay. All right. So does someone make a motion?
So, motion to pass 9121, seconded by Trustee Brown. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Pass unanimously. Okay, the hard work's done tonight.
Okay. I'm gonna
So,
send this.
oh, we never checked. Did y'all, did the public have a comment on what we just decided after we decided it? Seeing none, we're safe.
I have a question.
Chad, Trustee Brown.
Isn't there food back there for us? May I suggest we take a quick?
All right, so this brings us up to C, which is the workshop, which is the next big ditch we're going to
Yeah.
hole. Let's take a quick break, breathe, come back, and we'll start working on the board policy big sheets. policies, processes, and revisions. And I'm going to hand this back over to the superintendent, but I will say thank you to everyone who put all the work into this. These are monster lists, and the amount of work that everybody put in and Marla coordinating at this top has been amazing, because there's actually sharing of information now, which hasn't been a case in the past, and I appreciate all the work. And with that,
Fighting with the mics tonight. All right, just to try to frame this section, knowing that we've got an hour and 10 minutes and we have really 2 agenda items to run through, so we can kind of work with our time. I'm going to set the stage just on the work that we need to do. Marla's going to start out first with this document that outlines some data, and then I'm going to work with each of you in identifying some board policies that really should be revised during the board meeting, and then some board policies that we revise, perhaps my recommendation is on a couple Saturdays, but I'll get to that in just a minute. But to frame it, we have over 400 board policies that we currently need to revise. Currently, you can't do that all in a year's time. We spent the better half of an hour and a half just doing 2 tonight, and so we know what that feels like in a board meeting. In fact, if we reflect back to our last board meeting, I believe that there was one board policy that was, again, a chunk of an hour, if you will. Unfortunately, taking the time to go through the board policies the way we are is getting us further and further behind. Currently, Gavin Newsom has roughly 15 to 20 sitting on his desk that are going to come back to us either in January or next year. So we need to figure out a different process for revising some of the board policies, and some of them are very, very easy. Others, like you did tonight, really take an hour and a half. I mean, they take time to really think through. So I'm going to ask Marla to work through this document, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the activity that I'm going to have you all go through.
So the document that Dr. Noguchi is referencing is our, a timeline that was proposed for tonight. The first chart, thank you. The first chart that that is on the top is about the CSBA and Gamut. So you'll see their school year that CSB and Gamut wrote a policy. Theirs are the policy numbers of 0000 or 1 all the way to 9,000. And then you'll see the total number in that school year of policies that were created. So for example, we're in 1920, but as of the date of July 2019, there was already 25 that Gamut had created for 1920. In 1819, you'll see all the way over to the right, MCS completed 58. We've only completed last year 58 board policies. So you'll see, even in 1819, there was 112 provided from Gamut or CSBA, and we only completed 58. So if you look at the total there was 781 CSBA and Gamut board policies throughout the years. If you want to go down to the next chart, this is the chart we really want to focus on tonight. These are the ones we are recommending tonight for our timeline. So you'll notice on the left-hand side there's colors, green, yellow, and red. So green is for our recommendation for tonight for 1920. For the zeros category, there would be 11, 1010, 2010, and so on, for a total on the right-hand side of 156 board policies.
Can we turn off the?
Oh, is it back on?
I just turned it on to cool it down, but I didn't know, and then it started up again. Go ahead, turn it off. Good, yeah. we can
Yeah.
turn it off.
Somebody who's more.
But it was getting warm in here, so I was like, oh. And it's hard to do that. I wonder if the audio is probably getting, just the timer, turn the timer off.
If you just roll that, yeah, there you go.
okay.
So tonight we're recommending 156 to be completed in 2019-20, and we'll give you more details on that. In yellow would be 2020-21 for 145, and red would be 71, but just remember what Dr. Noguchi said, more will be coming to us. This total chart also shows some that are in process, so if they're in they've had a first read. Some of those are in the process area. And then you'll see completed as 56. So we had a total of 456 that we were recommending. Subtract that 56 because we completed it. So we're now at 400 policies needing revision. And I can tell you, as soon as I write this chart, it's outdated. So that's the best I could do at the time I wrote it.
Yeah.
One comment I should have added, these numbers, if it was a number, for example, 0413, that could be board policy, AR, and exhibit as one. So it's not individualized. So if you individualized it, it would add numbers.
All right, some of you might be asking, why in the world do we need to do 156? So like Marla had mentioned, it really isn't 156 because 56 have been completed already, so roughly there is 100. So why 100? Why not 80? Why not 50? Why not 130? What I asked Cabinet to do, and under Marla's leadership, was to take a look at all the board policies that we need to revise. Which ones are critical that we really need to have? Either they're mandated, they're part of our federal program monitoring, which we are in this year, or there were some that just really they needed to be updated. So that's where we got to the 156, again, 100 of those because we've gone through 56 of those. So again, divided out in year 1, year 2, year 3. In thinking about these board policies, we recognize that there are some board policies that we really need to do in a regular meeting. You know, the work around ethics, ethnic studies, and health standards, and some of those topics that the public really want to provide their input. All of these board policies, the public will have the opportunity to give feedback and input. But there are some members of the public that only are going to come on Monday. So I want to be respectful and conscious of that. So something that I did ask last Friday of you is to take a look at the board policies that were emailed to you, identify those, and they are listed right here, identify those board policies that you believe still should be in a regular board meeting. That's going to be our first activity. And then take a look at those that are going to that are not identified. We'll then identify how many we need to do on a Saturday time frame, and I'll talk a little bit about some options for doing that work. So tonight, one, we're going to identify the regular board meeting board policies that we think needs to be on a Monday board meeting. Then we're going to come back and sit down, and we are going to then talk about the Saturday structure and how are we going to realistically get all those read, and we have some ideas for you to consider. So in front of you, you have a marker. I'm trusting that you did a little bit of homework and I went through all of these. I'd like for you to go up to the board policies that are identified. There we have 00s, we have 1000s, 2000s, 3000s, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9. And just put a check mark next to the board policy that you believe need to be in a regular board meeting, and then we'll subtract out and have some more discussion. Any questions? And I'm also going to ask you gentlemen on the other side of the table to also participate, because there are some board policies that you may want on a regular Monday board meeting, because that's when you're scheduled to go to the board meetings and not necessarily on a Saturday. So feel free that if there's some board policies that you feel that you would like on a Monday, I'd also like you to identify that. All right. So I'm thinking this may take, 10 minutes. So I will call it back together in about 10 minutes, but right now let's identify those board policies.
All right. This one. There we go.
Now we can turn on the air conditioner because we're not talking.
I think part of the problem is this table's running.
That is in front of us.
Well, it did that. It did that before, and then it kicked on.
Oh, and then it
I
started
was like,
again?
oh man, yeah, it's something in the wall that makes it really loud. I don't know if it's always.
I know, I wanted to go up there. So where is this, the policy number, just So I think what would be good right now is to just take a wall walk, start in any one area and walk all around and look to see everything that everyone has identified and ask yourself, can we do all of these in the 8 board meetings that we have between now and we probably have 12 board meetings between now and the end of the year. My guess is it's going to be no, but still take a look at where there's some real interest. And then we're going to go back, we're going to switch it up just a little bit. You all have some sticky dots, and you're going to go back and do sticky dots, because some folks, I didn't give very good directions. Some did a check, some did a circle, and I think that isn't going to be as equitable as if we put our dots and we actually vote. But what I'm going to ask you to do when you vote is recognize that we've got so many Monday board meetings, and we know that any policy over 4 in one night, we don't have the ability to tell our story. We can't do the presentations and the reports and all the great things that we're doing, because we really can't be here till 12, right? So we really have to balance how much of the story we want told to our public, because folks do watch and folks do come out, and how much time do we want to spend on board policies. So really be judicious. If you really believe that needs to be out in public, then put a dot on there, right? And then we'll go back around and we'll take a look at where the majority of those are at. And if there's just singletons, then that's a conversation that we can have. And if there's ones with 3, 4, and 5, then that can be a different discussion. So why don't you, yeah.
I have a question. When you're done. Okay, are you finished? Okay. So my question is, so are we, so we have a lot of board policies that we have to go through, and we're trying to prioritize them. But if we don't do these ones in public, because we're so limited, it doesn't seem like it seems rushed to try to put this many before the end of the year, when we also have next year. So should some of these also be heard next year? Because in some ways, a lot of us would probably like to do some of these and not have them in a public meeting because of the controversy. So to me, that's not fair to the public to not have them in public in some ways. So I'm just saying that if I wanted to avoid it, then I'm going to not put a dot there, because I don't want to have it in public, because man, I know what it's like in this boardroom when we have a lot of discussion in public. So my question is so is it possible that we can still have the ones in public at another meeting in the same school year? Does it have to be done before December?
Oh, no, it's not all December. It's now to June. These are all between now and June.
So let's say there's 75, but we have only 8 meetings between now and June?
8 or 12.
Oh, okay,
you know?
all right, so,
And
That's a lot,
to
yeah.
clarify, just so the record isn't
go ahead.
misleading,
Yeah,
we can't vote on these or talk about these in anything other than a public meeting. So even if
Right.
it's a Saturday meeting, it'll be
Okay.
agendized, it'll be open to the public, it'll be advertised
Videoed.
and videoed. So like no matter what we do with these policies, we're not going back there and writing them.
no,
So that's really important. It's just a matter of which ones are in our board meetings and which ones are not. And that's kind of where we're thinking. My thought is that if it's really controversial, then it probably should be in a Monday night. But I hear your perspective, which is maybe not. And but that's, is it not on? No.
It's okay.
It sounded on. I don't see that. Okay. There's no light. Really where we're at is trying to decide, would it be easier? I mean, one of the good things about having our Saturday, if it's something really controversial, is we don't have students here. That, because in the conversation about some of these things maybe would be, even though we are concerning students, maybe wouldn't be on some of the controversial subjects, wouldn't be appropriate for all age students. So that would be beneficial on some of them as well. So maybe that's a factor. But the evening meetings are hard for people to get to too. So no matter what, people are busy. And
I think you make a good point. All of these are in a board meeting.
yeah,
It's either a special board meeting or a regular board meeting. So they will all be, you know, they will all have the, right, it's, nothing's in closed session.
Right.
You want to go?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, think about it as we definitely want to have all these. We're definitely all gonna be in public, but you know, when in thinking of which ones to circle is like if someone were like, I want to randomly go to a board meeting, right? They're more likely to be interested in these in the circle ones on a Monday night than they were the rest of them, right? I mean, they all have to be done in public, but which ones are we going to put it as the highlighted ones for our regularly scheduled Monday meetings, right? Far in advance, right?
I'm on. I think it's the one thing I would add, and I think it goes to how we get this done more effectively and more efficiently, is that we're going through ARs like they're BPs. And in all honesty, ARs don't need to be approved by the board, and they can be pushed to consent, and we're not up here rewriting. If we get the board policy written right, and you as a board member have a real issue with an AR, which is the how, not the what, then we pull it up. But I think more often than not, if the board policy is righteous, then put the AR on consent where it belongs, like most other boards will do, and we don't wade into the weeds on every single sentence of every single policy. We as a board get the board policy right, that's the what. The AR is the how, which goes to the district. Let them do that. It goes to the consent. The board member has the ability to request it get moved off of consent at any given meeting, but it would reduce the overhead and the amount of time we spend parsing words and language, if that makes sense. And it's certainly how our board policy on board governance bylaw on board policies, its gamut language, says ARs go to consent. Go.
So I think one thing that is really important for us to consider through this process is how much time and how much detail we need to give to any one given policy. And I think that we need to remember we're not writing a newspaper article. We're not writing for a magazine. We're writing to protect ourselves for legal purposes. And we have to remember that CSBA has given us language that will protect us. So anytime that we can possibly just say, CSBA said it really well, let's adopt it, I want to go with that.
And I think I would concur. I've only touched two. And all the time I've spent years hollering about board policies, the only time I've ever edited one, ever, was the last meeting. And by the time we're done with it, it wasn't that much. And in all honesty, the edits we made are back on these boards because what I was adding are now on these boards. Essentially, when we talked about controversial issues at the last meeting, it's on the board over there. I was just adding it to elucidate what we didn't have. And if we're doing all this, a lot of that disappears. But again, I think there's a way to sort of speed the process up so that we're not parsing every single policy when we can turn the ARs over to the district and let them handle the how and we deal with the what.
I'm going to throw out an idea. This is too many to do in our board meetings, and we're going to get nothing else done. We're not going to have reports. We're not going to have anything other than bylaws and board policies, and that's going to drive us. I mean, it's gonna it's not gonna be good because I think the board is part of what our board meetings are is to show what we're doing as a district and to showcase what's happening. And so what if we were to, we were maybe just circling, with less discretion, then maybe a second round, we have a limit of how many, maybe of your stickers, like just pick your top
20?
I was thinking 10. So
The reason why I say 20, then we could look to see where they all overlap. So the places that we have 2 and 3, then we could narrow it down that way. Or just 10, and we go with the 10 that we have.
but I was just going to throw out a number. That way we kind of, these are your real priorities. So, and what I would suggest is that when we go look at them now to put stickers, that you only put a sticker on the circled. So we've narrowed it down now to just the circled ones, and now we're trying to narrow that down further. So let's not recircle anything else.
It's circle or checks, because there's some folks that did checks, some folks that did
Yeah.
circles.
Some
So,
sort of notation.
Yeah, you can't put on it anything where it's blank.
Right. So some sort of notation, and then whether maybe we do. I'm going to throw out 10s. Dr. Noguchi's thrown out 20.
I say 20, at least 20.
How about
There's
15?
24. Let's still go with 20 because you can always narrow it down from that. But at least we could start there, and let's just see because who knows, it may not be as many as we think. But there's 6 of us, and we don't have John here to give his thoughts of where he'd like to have his put. But at least to me, you'll see. I think there'll be a pattern. It'll be like, okay, these ones are important. These ones. So I'd rather go more than less because
Sure.
if you have less, because you can always narrow it down. To me, you can't go expand it. I'd rather narrow it than, go from large to small.
All right.
Small, and then you're stuck.
So if we did 20, then you can't use 2 of these because that's 24. So you need to have 4 left on one. So,
I was going to say 10, but I'll go. I could go 20 as well. I think it's a great idea to not really look at ARs too closely. If we can just put them in consent, I think we've spent a lot of time on ARs that maybe isn't necessary. And I think when we look at our dots, it's important to think about what are the topics that we need to hear from the public, because I think there's some topics out here that we might have our own vision of what people are going to think, but I think it's important to look at ones where we might have differing viewpoints because we need to hear what the people are saying. And so those are the ones I think we should have on Monday nights.
And I would argue you might have to give me a different color and say there's actually something the public cares about and it ought to be down the road a bit that gives more time for the public to get involved. Because there's a handful sitting up here that folks will come unglued about as soon as we touch them. And if we go fast, that's not going to end up being a good result. And there's certainly, I can think of 6 off the top of my head that it's going to require quite a bit of work and effort. With that, you want to go?
Alrighty, let's take another 10 minutes.
So we're dotting.
You're dotting. You're doing what I'll do is I will process all the dots. Let us know how many we had: 6 and 5 and 4 and 3, and we'll narrow that down. I was just told that we have 14 board meetings. We have 15 board meetings left between now and the end of the year, not counting next week, but that one's already done as far as the agenda item. So I'll look to see what's reasonable. 3 or 4 is what I'm really shooting for. And then I'll bring this chart back to all of you during the one-on-one, so you'll see which of those made the cuts in the board meetings that we have. Now, the next piece is the ones that don't have any dots and that aren't going to be done at a regular board meeting. It's going to be done at a special board meeting, which is a Saturday. And now we need to make a choice. How are we then going to get the work done for Saturday? I've talked to a couple board members about this, and I have 2 different ideas. One, break off into teams of 2, so there'd be a total of 3 teams, and let's say Amy and Chad say, I'm going to work on the 7,000s and the 9,000s, and we'll come prepared for a Saturday board meeting working with staff. Staff will do all the merges. Staff will do all of that piece. So they will have those 2. Charlene and Adolfo take the 6,000s because that's a heavier lift perhaps. So it's looking at, in groups of 2, picking a particular group, if you will, and then come prepared on those Saturdays to do it. You'll have months to be able to do it and months to be able to read through what you need to do, and we can define that for you. Or, and I think this one's messier, and I think it would be more difficult, but it's more fine-tuned. You could go up, and this is where the dots were supposed to come in. You identify what board policies you want to lead on that Saturday, and you identify folks to work with on that. The issue with that is Amy could be working with all sorts of different people on all sorts of different board policies, and I think it would just be harder to track and harder to support you to be able to get that work done. So dialogue around how would we go about getting the board policies read and prepared for on Saturday. Again, the staff is going to do all the merging. You're then going to be given those merges, and then you make the comments that you believe, the shall to the may and the whatever it is that you're going to change. You would come to the Saturday meeting with those recommendations, and we'll put those in as a second iteration for the Saturday.
I like the idea of
Keeping your microphone on?
yeah, I know. Like I like the idea of the of doing it the way you said, the pairing up. I would say, however, that 6,000 would be a really big thing for any 2 people to do. And so pairing up on all of them, but for that one, and then we figure out what to do with that section. And a lot of those are going to be pulled off into a Monday night meeting.
Yes.
So what's left may not be as much of a Herculean lift, but that would be my recommendation, is maybe we pair up on all the other sections but for that one, and then we figure out what to do on that one, and maybe another strategy, just because it might require us working through it as a group on like we take one particular Saturday just for the remainder of those 6,000 and to clean up any work left over from our Monday board meetings on those 6,000s. So like we have a 6,000 Saturday. Yep. And that would be, so it's all kind of that thinking in that one, in that one time frame. Maybe that would work best on that. And then I think that would be we could maybe get done with like a half a day Saturday. It would be less, but I'm not sure we could do it all in that one.
I think we ended up close to, I forget that I've got a mic pinned to me now, so I was thinking of a hybrid version, and you sort of got at that, and the idea being that if we're going to pair up in teams and work on a certain set, and somebody else is working on a different set, if staff is doing the merges, then send out the merge initial to everybody so that at least you have it. And so if potentially somebody cares about something in the 1,000s, but you're not working on that group, you have the initial merge in front of you, so at least you can make your notes and say, well, this is what I thought. I'll see what the rest of them come back with. And especially with the 6s, but you get the best of both worlds. You'd work in a team, but you would be able to see what everybody had initially, and you could make your notes if that's something you cared about being involved with.
So if I'm understanding you, you'd work as a team, so what you're asking, if I'm understanding, is that all of you are gonna be reading all of these?
If you wanted, they would have been made available to you. I'm not saying everybody's going to open up every one, but if you're going to do the merges and you're going to put them out into a group, then just make them available. So if you want to pick them up and look at them, you can see what the merge looks like. Odds are it's not going to be that many of them, but at least you're looped in. And then you can still pair up in the groups. And I agree with Amy about the 6,000s. I think it's the instructional piece. It's what we're all here for. It's what we care about at the end of the day. Everything supports that. And so that's the beast in the room. But I think that's a way to get at both pieces at once without putting anybody through any extra trouble. It's an issue of opening up your email and looking at it or not.
Is it? Isn't that just like what we do to prepare for a regular board meeting?
I would
like
give you
already?
packets. I would say, here's the packets that are coming on Saturday. It's Chad and Amy's, but so you're prepared. This is where we're at. So I would do that anyway, so you're not coming Saturday blind.
Right.
Otherwise,
I guess go ahead, Chad.
He should use them.
So a little bit of feedback that would be really helpful. Do we know how many of these policies we currently do not have? It's just going to be totally read from CSBA,
good question though.
because those are going to take very little input.
Yeah.
Those are the protection policies that we need to say, CSBA did the work, why do we need to?
Yes.
I think there's a way to get that list. It's just not in front of us right now, which is why I'm looking at Marla, because she's got a master sheet of everything. And by accident, I happened to be working on this a month ago, and I created my own, and we've married them up. And so I have a way of keeping track of what we don't have, and so does she. And so there's a way to see that, yes. It's not in front of us tonight, but it wouldn't take much to get there. It's just an Excel filter. And so it's not a heavy lift. And then I guess my idea on the packets was it wouldn't be 3 days before. It'd be long enough in front that you could process a queue of what you're working on and not be sitting here at the last day over 72 hours trying to figure out how do I look at 82 policies at once for what that's worth. I find that overbearing and too much, even though I've looked at them a lot.
Yeah, but then
I think the experience at the last board meeting, we had 15 of them to look at. That was about my limit on a weekend.
Alrighty, so we can do one of two things here. We can either identify those categories that you're, besides the 6,000s, so we're going to take 6,000 off, and we're going to put a pin in that and figure out the best way to work with them, and identify pairs and particular categories, or we can think through what those categories are, and when I meet with you guys all, I meet with you all one-on-ones every 2 weeks. You can identify what an interest area is of you, for you, and I can work to be able to create pairs that way. Which would you like to do?
Just a suggestion. Do you want to go first? No, go ahead. What if we just kind of walked around and put our color in a particular corner if we felt like that's one that we have strengths and interest in?
And do 2. Right, so 2 dots, and if you put it up, please put it on here.
Okay.
Okay, that way it won't get confused.
I
Right
get-
on the number.
Oh,
That way it won't get confused with the dots.
I gave you my dots back.
I will give you 2 dots back, John. Alrighty, that's a great idea. Thanks.
Not counting 6.
No sixes.
That's actually a great idea.
mentioned, that the green and red, you were gonna stick together, I don't know if I'm
Goes
on.
towards you, yeah.
We can just leave them on too, 'cause
I know Adolfo and I, it looks like we'll be working on the 1000s, and if you keep the green and red together, then we'll be whatever ones you assign us for that one as well. Just for
continuity.
it's continuity, and it's also like, scheduling. I think would be easy if we could kind of stay in our whatever, keep with pairs. Put that on.
To see where John Irvin wants to be too.
Good point. So I'll work with him on the one-on-ones. All right, that was a lot of work. We have a lot of work ahead of us. I appreciate the flexibility, and I think we got to the right spots. And I think that our regular board meetings also are now more manageable because literally just stuff's flying at us, and we don't quite know if there's 3 or 7 that are going to hit us. So I think that we have a good plan. So I appreciate the flexibility and the work on this. So the next agenda item is really 2, and there's some conversation to be had relative to meeting structure. But before I go to meeting structure, I'd like to talk about some work that Ms. Noonan has done relative to the recommendations. The recognitions. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold or flu, whatever that bug was. It was not fun. Get your flu shot. So in front of you, you have this document. I included it underneath of all of your paperwork. I'll be pretty quick just in the interest of time, but what you see in front of you, actually, it's this document. What you see in front of you is really the foundation of the board meeting recognition calendar. And I don't believe that you've received something like this in the past. Really the goal, just to remind everyone and how I have a vision for where it will go, is this calendar is providing you opportunities to meaningfully recognize students, teachers, parents, staff, different service groups, and community organizations within your board meetings. I think that you've kind of seen in the first couple that we've done a few of the recognitions and how it's changed a little bit. I want you to know that, like I said, this is a foundation. This document, that's why I wrote draft at the top, because there will be changes that it will go through throughout the year. You see some of them that are highlighted in blue. Those are specific for what we're looking at doing at the board meetings. The other ones that are not shaded, that's, for example, that we'll post on social media. We're also developing a more robust recognition calendar that will incorporate much of this, but this is just a start, like I said, a foundation. And this is really the opportunity to showcase our work and really showcase the kids that we're educating and the young scholars that are out there. We just posted, for example, on Facebook tonight and Instagram. So follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We posted our National Merit Scholarship recipients. That is such a prestigious program. And, really the point is to get the word out about all the good work that's being done here within the district. So what you see in front of you is an outline of the calendar throughout the year. At this point, I want you to know, like I said, this is somewhat fluid because I can't predict what may come up, say, in April of next year, that we may have a meaningful recognition opportunity. And I don't want to say, oh, no, we can't do that because it's not on the calendar. So I want you to know that that's something that I'm keeping in mind so that it can flex as the year goes on. But it at least provides you with a good, like I said, foundation. When you're building a house, the most important thing to start with is the foundation and then work up from there. So I'm happy to entertain any questions that you may have on it. And as far as the process, I'll be your lead on the staff side in terms of coordinating the recognition. Becky Fortuna is hugely an asset on that, as well as Julie Inacio on my staff, as well as Mady Herrera and Patty Munoz. So they've all been tremendously helpful. We're looking at about 10 to 15 minutes per board meeting. You may have some recognition that will take place before the board meetings, especially if it's a larger group. We're also looking at some different changes within the room, some of the decor, but just, minor things, because we really, we don't want to infringe on a lot of the board meeting time when the business is being done as well. But I'm happy to entertain any questions, and I want you to know too, one other thing. We are still looking at doing, you've probably remembered the the character ed or the character trait recognition and the MCS heroes, those aren't going away. So I just haven't called them out on this. So for example, if you look at, let's see, September 30th, in blue, it says the Bret Hart Attendance Patrol. That's being promoted as an MCS Heroes recognition. So Principal Marla Conte, she'll be here to present. I think it's about 7 or 8 parents who have been instrumental in increasing their attendance over last school year. So we really want to take an opportunity to recognize them. But I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Trustee West,
I just had a quick one for National
grab the mic. Or they come out and tell me you're not in the mic again.
For National School Counseling Week in February, is it possible to include the school psychologists in that as well so we can acknowledge them as well?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Amy?
And I'd also like us to have Science Olympiad. We have the regional competition in March usually, and we Modesto City Schools usually brings home quite a few awards on that, more than any other district in the area. We're the biggest district, so the odds are ever in our favor.
Okay.
But so just acknowledging some of our winners that'll be going on to representing us at the state, and that I think that Science Olympiad would be important to do. There's also a Math Super Bowl that we have locally.
But in
just
March as well? Do you remember the time frame?
yeah,
If
it's
not, I can look
February
into
or
it.
March.
Oh, okay. The
Mike
Math
Rich,
Super Bowl.
Mike Rich is
Oh,
always involved in that, and he would be able to tell you much more details than I can.
Okay.
And but just to make sure that we celebrate those awards, and just because it's so important, and it's so many staff people and parents and such help on that.
Right. Okay. Great input. For mock trial? Okay. I'll look into that too. Okay. Any other input?
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
So, does that get it back to me now? That's what I'm doing now, right? C2, board meeting protocols recognition?
Yep.
Okay, so the last piece of this was something we have been talking about, at least the two of us, and I've sort of talked to a couple of different board members about being more efficient in the board meetings. As part of that, I want to stop and pause because we talked about the ARs. If we're going to allow the staff to move the ARs to consent, unless we want them pulled out, I believe we should have a vote on that so that we at least have an official record that moving forward we'll address board policies as the board bylaw states. ARs go to consent. If you want one pulled up out of consent, you just have to ask for it. But other than that, we work on board policies in meetings and staff works on ARs. So I'd be looking to entertain a motion, a second.
I would move, so move.
I'll second. Essentially all it does is just move them to consent, which is where they are for most other boards, and based on the 9,000 board bylaw we adopted, if we want to pull them up, it's just a request. It gets pulled up into the regular, just like any other consent item would be, but it doesn't default that we debate every single AR.
I don't have a problem with doing that. I'm concerned about a motion. I was taking a vote on this because I'm not sure we've agendized it's pretty vague. It says board meeting workshop, board meeting protocols and recognition. And
Board policy process,
yeah, so
policy revision process.
I mean maybe we would need.
We can put that on the 30th. We can add that to the next.
It's just
board
a quick agenda item. Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
I'm just not sure if we have an agenda item listed enough that we can take action. I want to make sure we've done it appropriately if that's what we're going to do.
It's early enough, and I can get that on Agenda Online.
Okay.
Benefits of Agenda Online, right there, folks.
Yeah.
Okay, if that's off the list, then we're down to sort of
The flow.
the flow of the meeting. It's
Okay, so let me talk a little bit about this. And I've had a number of conversations over this last year and recently with President Walker and such. So in just looking at our board meetings and the efficiency and the effectiveness of the meeting, part of it is 8 hours. I think that certainly will help the workload of those 400 board policies. That would be 800 if we were doing board policies in AR. So it kind of puts some things into context. So I'd like for you guys to go with me on this. I'm going to read these. Anything that has a an italicized or underline, that is a potential change. So what I'm talking about now is the board meeting itself and making some substantive changes to our board meeting. First, recognitions is going to look different. You can see just right now that even the room is beginning to look different, and it will continue to evolve as we get our logo and we get some things up. And we also get student artwork, which we plan to get up here, and some student pictures. So this just was painted a couple days ago, so that is going to see a change there. So the flow of the meeting: call to order, report on closed session, that's normal. And then we always have a moment of silence. But in consult prior to the board meeting, I'd like to identify why are we having a moment of silence. My understanding is we have a moment of silence because that took the place of prayer, but is now morphed into a moment of silence, which is wonderful. But there's a lot of things we can recognize, both nationally, in the world, within our communities, just someone, a group, a cause, something that we can have a moment of silence to.
On that, what we've done is we've done it as needed. So if there's something that needs recognition, one of the board members will make a note to the board president. Or, I mean, because I know when I've been president, I've done it probably 5-6 times, maybe over 2 terms. But there have been things that have happened that we recognize. And so usually it's as needed basis, and it is useful.
Right.
And like somebody in the community that's died, Cindy will tell me like somebody in the community that's died, or we,
Yeah, no.
but maybe being more organized about it would be a good idea. That, you know, it's on our radar. Krista could be kind of scouring of, hey, moment of silence for maybe this, and then the board president would have the discretion as to, you know, yeah, that's something, or no, you know, because we need a little bit of a litmus test on it. And otherwise, I think it's been a lot of times there have been quite a few. There haven't been any since you've been here, which is good because that means nothing really bad has happened.
No, I think there's a few, and I think it's good to just stop and pause for a minute and have a moment of silence, right? But if we could highlight and honor something in particular, so we can come up with a system where folks give us some input, and then obviously the board president then can identify what would be honored if there's multiple. And I don't really see that is necessarily going to be the case. So we do the moment of silence. We do the Pledge of Allegiance. That's normal. We do Superintendent's Welcome. Glad that everyone's here. And this is a change, and I think that this can highlight and support board members as with the work that they do in the community. We know that at the very last thing that we do in our board meetings, when no one else is left, even senior directors are gone, that's when you share what you've done. But you guys really do a lot of great work out in the community, and I think this would be a time to be able to report out. I would caution us that we keep it to like a minute. Otherwise, it could now be in a 20-minute venue because the room's packed. So I think that we would need to just need to be judicious on the time frame of that. And that's something that we can talk about here in just a minute. Then we have recognition. So board member reports, recognitions, and then we do consent. So this is all normal. Approval of order of discussion. All of this is normal. Public presentation, student rep. MTA, do you want to continue to be on the agenda? Or you can come up as needed. It's up to you.
As I've shared with you in consult, we generally make about 2 reports a year unless something unusual happens, so we don't need to be on the agenda every month. We can ask.
Okay. Dawn, how about you? Would you like us to say CSEA, or would you like us just to call it out when in consult?
Have a recognized spot, but same goes for us. You know, it's used sporadically, not very often.
So would you like us to keep it there? Or would you like to just have it when you have something, you know, because in consult you usually share when you're going to say something?
Yeah, as long as we have that option.
Okay. And certainly you guys are always on any time in public comment, you're welcome to come up there, but we see each other just a couple days before the board meeting anyway. But I think it does set a statement when we always say, you know, Modesto Teacher Association, nothing. I mean, it almost says that there's nothing important, but there's lots that's important. It's just that's not, you guys are using the venue to be able to showcase your scholarships and your work in the community and such. So, so good. I wanted to bring some voice to that. Now, here's another piece that I want us to take a look at and think about. and that is going back and forth to the community. Currently, we go out to the community in some cases 2 and 3 times, depending upon what the board president does. But we really can limit this if we get disciplined, and the community also is disciplined with that. So, for instance, we have a presentation. It could be a report, it could be an action item, whatever. We're doing a report on the marketing plan that Ms. Noonan is going to be doing in 2 board meetings. The board members then have questions to Ms. Noonan. What about this? What about that? What are you doing with this? You ask her all sorts of questions. Then you go out to the public. Public, do you have any questions? Then the board has all of their data, the information from the presenter, their questions answered, the comments from the community. Then it goes back to the board for any sort of action or report out. It doesn't then go back out to the community again. It's just more of a structured timeline for this.
And I think that's a good idea. I mean, that's what we lay out in our protocols. I mean, the board president has to be really disciplined about, if there's somebody that says, well, now I want to comment. And you have to basically tell them the time has passed, and you have to say no. And so we have to be prepared to face the flack of, well, they didn't let me talk. And then we also have to be really cognizant that if the board, after public input, if the board goes back to the staff with more questions, you've basically gone back over the cycle again. And that I think it opens up the door again for public comment, because you've opened up the door to questions. So the questions need to be asked before the public input.
Right, and that's how it's listed here. So,
Yeah.
What are other thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's the correct order, and it's how it should be done. And then the board president should be able to say, and now we've completed the public input, and now it's time for the board to talk with one another to make a decision, if that's what's on the table. But I think this portion should be laid out in the agenda that the public receives. So they see that there's a presentation, there's board questions, there's public input, and then there's board action. Because I don't think they always recognize that. But if
You could say it, you could, how we have that beginning of our agenda, you could put it right there, just put a sentence in there. And then say, for each agenda item, this is the way we proceed.
Yes. That way it's reiterated to the public and to remind us as board members, this is what we've agreed to. So
I guess my question is, why is it that if we ask a question, does it reset the process? I mean, I've heard you say that before. I don't understand why that has to cause a reset when the public gets an opportunity to comment on an agendized item. They've had a chance to comment on it.
It goes back to kind of like, as I understand it, when I've led boards before, it goes back to like kind of Robert's Rules of Order. When you are going to staff, you're basically seeking input from something other than the board. So you're going back to staff for getting more input, and then that's why it starts to cycle back over again. But I mean, it doesn't have to. I mean, we could agree it doesn't, but it opens a door to that, in my opinion.
Just because we don't function off of Robert's rules, and the reason they don't apply Robert's rules to meetings like this is because they don't function that well in this sort of setting versus a smaller dynamic setting where they do, if that makes sense. I've never understood why that triggered resetting the circle again. Not that and again, this goes back to your point about public comment. I would use the last board meeting as an example. I didn't necessarily want to take another card, but it was clear if I didn't take the next card at some point that I was going to have an eruption. And so it became, at this point, I look to my left and my right and my fellow board members and go, okay, I got to call the ball here. I'm going to call it at this one, and then we're done, even though we've broken the protocol, because you make that judgment call. But that's different than restarting the process because somebody asked a question on the board. I think that's our job.
So I just would like to make a comment on that. So I believe that if significant information has changed the dialogue that the board is making a decision on, then it would be appropriate, because I do recall that we had something like that happen, and the board had a discussion that changed a lot from what the public actually thought we were choosing to do, and the public really wanted to have some input on that. And so I don't remember who was the president, but it might have been you, Amy, but allowed the public to give some more input because there was such a change, and I can see that that would be a good reason to go back out to the public again for more input. But other than that, that has, in all the years I've been on the board, I can't say, it's happened one time.
That's what I'm trying to get at,
So,
because
yeah,
I think,
I wouldn't say
I think
that it
if you're
goes out to
sitting
the
up
public
there,
very often.
if you have a board president, whoever it may be, if the rest of the board is going, you need to go back out there again, and you're not listening, then you're gonna pull the board president aside and say, hey, you need to go back out there again because this happened, and you can see them out there saying they want another crack at this, but it's a unique special bit, and I think that falls under board president managing the meeting, and it's an exception, not the rule. And we would all, I would think, with at least within this group, recognize that. If we're not here, I wish you Godspeed.
I just want to point out that a lot of times in my thinking, my questions don't come until I've heard everybody else's comment.
Yep.
And I know that drives Amy crazy. But does it mean we shouldn't ask those questions?
No, that's my point. I actually want you to do so and not feel like I have to restart the process. I think if the public's had a moment and they've had an opportunity to comment, which they absolutely should. I saw a board meeting in another place this week. I was driving home and I just killed time and popped on YouTube and listened to it. Public came up, knocked out all public comment questions. Very first part of the meeting, you never heard from the public again. Completely wrong. Completely wrong. But I do think that you can go out and get your opinion, come back, and then the board can ask questions, ask comments, interact with staff, interact with management, interact with each other, make a decision and move forward. And that's the process, unless you see out in the audience that something has happened within our discussion that has set off lightning within the crowd.
See, as much as it is our job to ask the questions, like you said, like based off all the information that you have, right? We're entrusted to the people out here, whether it's 1, whether it's 20, whether it's 100, right? And so it's like, as much as at the end of the day, we want to hear from them that we're making the right decision, right? I mean, at the end, like I said, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who we have in front, right? We have to, based on what we hear out there and what we gather in here, to make a decision. So yeah, if they're gonna have another question that they might have some insight, I want to hear it. So definitely, I'm on the camp of like, I'm gonna make questions, or I'm gonna ask questions once I hear something from the individual, right? And I would not want to limit that at all, right? When they cannot, or when they can no longer make a voice, because I really feel strongly about the public's input.
I don't think we're taking that out of the. We're not. There's nobody limiting the public input. We're just saying that.
Are you saying then after a board member asks questions, I always think that once a board member asks questions, we cycle back. So this is like a cycle, okay? Presentation, board questions, public input. So once a board member asks questions, when we're down here, then it cycles us back to then we have to go back to public input.
Right. Yeah.
That's always been my opinion and so that's why I get like, oh no, another question. but I know you need to ask the question, and I don't want to, we definitely shouldn't preclude each other from asking questions. But are you then saying we need, if a board member asks questions, it opens the door to public input again?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
But I think if you choose to do that, and again, this is a collective decision, it's going to limit the board. I would think it would limit some board members from asking questions, because then it would have to cycle back out again.
Yep.
So instead of being able to ask that question, because I really have a question right now, but it'll set the whole cycle again, and the same 4 people are going to come up saying the same thing they said in the first 3 iterations. You would stop asking questions. That's my opinion.
And each person in the audience only gets one chance to speak. And we are limiting time, and so we have that in our protocols now. So they couldn't come back up, but people with them could come back up and say the same thing again.
I mean, think about it this way. At the let's take a different board meeting. At the SCOE board meeting I was at, we did Stanislaus County. Their agenda item specifically states on the agenda item as it states, the public has a period to 20 minutes of comment. Out the gate, it's done, very much like our open comment. After that public comment period is over, it's done, it's back to the board, they make their decision, they ask their questions, they deliberate, they vote, and they move forward. I don't think what's on here is any different. I just think that what we've done here is this constant iterative process that gets us here until 1 o'clock if something gets sideways. But I also think, like the superintendent said, it limits our ability to ask a question, because I'm up here saying, okay, this is question time versus comment time, but I've now got a question because I heard somebody else say something. And I don't think it should reset the entire debate. But I agree with Aldolfo that you look out and go, does it look like somebody has a comment there? And then maybe that's the board president going, are we good? You know, did somebody say, we know who's sitting out here. How do you phrase that question and make a judgment call that says, we're going to go to a vote? Does there, how do you, without resetting it and limiting us to asking questions? If I'm making sense.
Yeah, primarily the reason why I brought this up, and I knew there was going to be dialogue. I looked at 7:30 and went, oh, I know we're going to have dialogue on this. I knew it. Part of it, and the reason for trying to get some consistency, is because what we just voted on over here, we're opening up some Pandora's boxes, because it's time to open up Pandora's box, because we've been kicking it down the road 3, 4, 5 years. So unless we're really clear on how we're going to manage this right here, it really is going to be challenging. I don't want to, by any means, limit public input and their viewpoints, but we're going to need to manage 6,000. And that's really the reason why this is here. But it's going to be really good in another 3 years when we're all up to date and we can move forward with a solid foundation. So
I like the ordering. I mean, I don't have any problem with the ordering. I mean, I've thought about whether we could do presentation, public input, board question, board action. I mean, whether you could switch the order of those two, so then board questions wouldn't open up public comment again. Once public comment's done, then it just goes to the board and it stays with the board, and then you move on to the next agenda item. So that would be an interesting way. However, there's going to be, the public is going to, I mean, we may have those questions answered by staff with our questions, and then the public wouldn't need to do it. And, and so our questioning kind of hones the scope of what is going to be decided. And then so the public can kind of see where we're going, and then their comments could be narrowed accordingly. So, but I think that presentation, board questions, public input, and board action is the way it usually it should go. And then if public input, if during board action there's more questions, and it opens up public input again, I mean, we could be in a cycle where we don't move on. So we have to agree that even if there's public outcry, then we wouldn't, we need to make a decision. If there's public outcry, then we would need a majority of the board to move forward to action, or to moving on to the next agenda item, because it might just be a report. So we would need the majority of the board to dictate whether that goes back to public input or not. That could be an option.
That might be, is this thing on again? That might be the option simply anyway, to say, look, it looks like there's more, it looks like our discussion has now got the public engaged again. Is there a majority of the board that we want to go back to the public to get some input back on this issue that seems to have everybody?
And then the board president could say, and comment would be limited to 1 minute.
Correct.
And you could say something like that, and then the discretion would be to be much more limited, and
Yes.
it would only be done in extraordinary circumstances.
Exactly right.
And maybe if we would proceed with an understanding like that if we start talking and they're just mad about what we're talking about, and there's no questioning, and they're just mad about it, then the public's just mad and there's outcry about it. I don't think the cycle goes back. I think you move on.
Yes, I
don't
agree.
think anything is triggered. You have to move forward.
No, and I agree. I think if you look at other board meetings, not necessarily ours, but you look at the assembly or other legislative boards, Public comments listed to 1 minute. It's not a question. It's are you in support or are you not? You stand up, you give a name, you say you're in support, you say you're not, and then you keep moving. I think that's limiting. But at the same time, I think there needs to be some sort of boundaries, and I think that it ends up being more that we manage this and others have to follow us. Like many times I've said, I don't necessarily worry about this 7. And
So
I
the
think that
only time public input would get reopened is if there are board questions, which would re-trigger it, and then there would be a specific process of how we would limit further public comment.
I don't know if it's a board question.
Questions that change the direction.
That change the direction and indicate that there's something going on in the public, like you were saying. Because we had an instant where it did, and we kept going back out to the public. We were trying to revise policy. It was it was a policy revision one, and it kept going back and forth. And there was so it was very difficult to control. But questions were the things that were triggering it again. But anger of the public, I mean, then we'll never move on some of this.
I think it's almost a nuanced position where we have to use good judgment and then trust that you look left and right. Whoever's sitting in the middle looks left, looks right, and say, is there agreement that looks like the public wants more input here? We're going to give them a minute apiece, let it go. But other than that, we stay up there. And it's a 1, 2, 3, 4. You use good judgment. Look left, look right. Are we good? Go back out. You got a minute apiece. Please keep it to questions. This isn't a part where you're going to yell and scream.
We don't have a limit on public input on agenda items, and we limit the time each person can speak, but we don't have a limit on how many people can speak.
Correct. Which is, again, unique.
So do we want to, is that something we need to talk about?
I'd almost rather come back and revisit that on a second iteration. Let's get through getting used to this first in the sense of one bite at a time.
Okay.
Because you can certainly go to SCOE and it says 20 minutes and done. They count heads and you're done. But at that particular meeting, it was a contentious item and they changed the rules. And they let people keep coming, which is exactly what I said was going to happen.
At 20 minutes, they stopped it at 20 minutes.
They went more, they added more people because folks, they kept saying, well, is there a student? Is there somebody else? And they added 3 or 4 more speakers because the room was heated. And I said, we were sitting next to her, I said, they're going to have to add. And they did because it was the right thing to do. And I think that's the judgment we make. And it's not necessarily because somebody asked a question, it's the feel for the room. And I think we've got good enough sense to figure that out. And if we don't, they're going to bounce us out of here anyway at the next election. If we're goofy about it, they're going to tear us apart. So I think that's the prevention of us getting it wrong.
So I have 2 things, and I know Cindy also wants to add something. The other thing that you'll see in the board meetings is in the back of the room we have a whole bunch of folks with computers, much like we saw at the beginning of the meeting here, folks doing their work, heads down. I really don't think that's the best use of everybody's time. The senior directors of school leadership I want here for any parent complaints or concerns or anything that has to do with the reports. But if you're not connected to a presentation, I'm going to offer up to the senior directors that they don't need to be here unless they want to be here for professional development, which some do. But we are going to see a little different change there. I also want to be able to open up the back of the room also, which is just going to be a little bit more inviting. And then the last one before Cindy brings her piece, I do want to get your input from board members' reports right after I say welcome. Glad to see everyone's here. I'm excited about this board meeting. Do you guys want to do your board reports then, or do you want to wait till the end of the meeting?
I think that's fine then, as long as limit. I mean, like just 30 seconds. I mean, a minute. I mean, it's got to be really short, and I think it's fine.
I think after we've attended like a CSBA conference, it's helpful to maybe have that time allowed a little longer so that board members might be able to say, I went to this workshop, it was really helpful. And I wouldn't mind if it was after the recognitions, but there are a lot of people there at that time, so maybe we could ask to have, the board chair, whoever it is at that time, can ask to have it moved to after recognition so there is some time to share what we learned at the conference. So we're sharing ideas that are of interest to us, but we're also showing the public that the time we spent away was helpful for the direction that we look at our district and the things that we think are important for our district to learn. So I always think it's good to come back and share. I don't know, did your board do that, Chad, before the Sylvan board? Did you have a time to share? No, because I've talked to other boards that they actually set aside time after their workshop at CSBA to share specifically on some of the workshops that they want to share about that they went to. You're not going to share on all of them. You just share on a few of them, but you go, oh, I went to a facilities one. I learned a lot about the bond. I think it's really helpful because we're going to be passing a bond, and I just wanted to tell you this is what I learned, because you can't talk about it with all of us at the conference. So that's your only opportunity to share what you learned. So that was helpful at some point. But that isn't what but I had something else. Yeah.
All right.
So board reports, where would you like them?
After recognition.
After recognition?
Everybody's going to be gone.
Yeah, but
I think it sort of defeats the purpose of it.
I kind of like it before as well when everybody's here, but
Yeah,
let's try it. Let's try it before. Let's see how it goes. And then let's see if we can limit it to the really short amount of time. And then if it's not working, let's move it after. Does that sound?
I saw a couple of board meetings I was watching online. I just pulled up other board meetings and watched them to see what they were doing. And I noticed this on two of them. I thought it made an interesting point. And I thought, hey, we do this at the end. Nobody ever hears us but each other. And we do a lot of good things out in the community. And I thought, take 90 seconds, knock it out, ding, 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 ding. Share what you've done. It forces us to keep it short because you know that they're waiting. And then at least somebody other than me, you know what we did out in the community. That was sort of the underlying concept there, is that.
Yeah, but just say we'll go back in January.
So I think we should keep it early, but to Cindy's point, something like a CSBA conference, we might want to have a short agenda item that's separate from the board reports.
Yep.
Right.
I agree.
And that way we can
Make a
keep
good
it
judgment
concise and always short.
That way it's a nice judgment call, and that duly noted.
So I will keep it where it's listed here, and then we'll come back in January and reevaluate it. I'll put an agenda item where you guys can have a discussion if you want to move it at another place, but we'll do it through the holidays, the beginning of the year. We will adjust that.
So one other question about the way the board meeting flows. We're not seeing on the agenda online any time recommended time frames. Is there any way that we can reintroduce that back into our board meetings? Because I think that will help us.
So what staff know that their presentations can't go anything more than 15 minutes. We can, as you know, they were all over the place. We'd say 10 and it'd go 20. We'd say 20 and it'd go 50. And it was kind of like this. All of our board presentations are standardized, either 10 minutes or 15 minutes, with the exception of the data. And data is we know that one's going to be a longer one. I can ask Antoinette if there's a way that we could put parentheses a certain time, embedded within the title, if that would help. But I can share with you all the presentations I'm going to see tomorrow morning, which is next Monday's board meeting. They're all 15 minutes, with the exception of the data. But I can, if that will be helpful, I can add that in. I can try. We'll do that, and then we'll check in January if it made a difference or not.
Right.
Okay.
That's good.
All right. I think
Now
that-
Cindy had some.
Oh, you got.
I just had one. Okay, so it has board policy revision on the order that things go. We had reports, discussion, action items. I just was wondering, because I know when we do board policy at the end of the evening, we're all tired. It's the rules that we abide by, or that we're saying these are the rules that we want to govern ourselves by. So, and our district. So I was wondering if we could move it up to have it maybe do a couple of reports and then do board policy revision, and then have a couple of reports after it. Just so it's, because it's decision making. It's actually making action, and when you're making action, you want your brain in the best capacity to be able to make a decision. And so I'm wondering so I didn't know why it was at the end, why all of our board policies are at the end. So I always felt like if we put all the budget at the end of the meeting, is it because we don't want the public there? But if we're putting these on regular board meetings so that the public has an opportunity to be there. So if there is some input that they would like to have, they know that it's going to be, they don't have to spend 5 hours at a board meeting to hear it at the end of the meeting. So that's if our meeting goes long. So I was just asking to have it moved up a little bit so that the public has an opportunity to comment and our brains are in their best capacity. Doesn't have to be at the beginning, just in the middle.
And I certainly will take input. I would hope that our board reports have equal value when we're talking about the budget and LCAP and CTE and intervention centers and all the things that we have. I think we put it at the end, knowing that we're going to wordsmith and staff in the room and trying to value their time because they're up and out by 7:30 in the morning. But we could split it if that's what you guys would like to do a couple and a couple, or at the end. I'm totally up to whatever you guys would like to do.
I don't want to wordsmith.
That's what we do.
I like the board policies kind of as a lump at the end, just because it gets you in that mindset of, okay, this is what we're doing. Just not have so many on agenda.
I agree.
Last time was like
Yes.
Yes.
just killer, and so so that's it's just managing the agenda better, I think would be fine. But
You guys just managed the agenda.
yeah, so just managing
Yes,
it
yes.
better.
Yes.
I agree. I like. I like the board policies at the end as well. I think the reports, I like them to give the report so that they can leave. And I think if we are doing the board policies on Saturdays and we're condensing,
Agreed.
we won't have that many at the end, and I think it won't be as time intensive and exhausting.
I agree. That was the whole point of today, was to get it into a better process flow so we don't end up in that box, especially after 15 at the last meeting. I'm still getting therapy. So, does that get us to the end? Looking for a motion to adjourn. Second?
I have one comment.
Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry. Go, sir. At any time.
I just want you to be cognizant of the fact that moving your board reports to the front of the meeting, if you don't keep them short, the perception by many of our members and members of the community will be that you've intentionally done that to put the action items later in the evening so that they get tired and go home.
Oh, no.
That was my
So be cautious of how much reporting you do.
Right. I agree.
Point well taken.
Thank you.
All right. Does that get us back to a motion to adjourn? And a second to
I'll
adjourn?
second.
Was that Charlene?